Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Voices of Delphi podcast. My name is Sarah France.
And I'm Makayla Davis, and we're two women joined together by a mutual love for the mystical, magical, and the metaphysical. This podcast is dedicated to conversations on bridging the esoteric with the mundane, reintegrating ancient wisdom into the modern day, and inspiring listeners worldwide to reawaken the oracle within. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please do not forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, as this helps to keep bringing you more of what you love. Welcome back, Sarah.
Welcome. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. It's been lovely to be on this journey now, week 5 of the podcast. Woot woot. So, thank you to all of those of you who have subscribed and who have liked, commented, shared. It really means the world to me and Makayla. So, today we have a lovely little episode for you guys that's going to center around the themes of ritual, spell work, and all things magical, right? Being able to set forth into your environment and either manifest or attract that which you desire through these kind of psychosomatic and witchy practices that Makayla and I are going to introduce and deep dive into. So, with that being said, Makayla, do you want to introduce this concept of ritual or spell work and what it means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, little backstory is Sarah and I have had a few clients been asking us tips and advice on how to do ritual, manifest money, love, success, abundance. And because it's such a continuous question asked, and we also see a lot of women out there making their money, doing a great thing on, Etsy and these shops selling these rituals. We thought it was really important, especially because Sarah and I are both Aries, very independent women, to give you the tools to understand what ritual is and how it's actually really important. You should start this practice yourself. And, I don't think a lot of people actually understand it's already ingrained in us naturally in society, whether it's intentional or not. And once you begin to understand what this practice is, then you can understand how to implement it and use it to really move the needle forward in your life or create some momentum. So I think there's so many different definitions on ritual, and Sarah and I had a deep dive conversation before we got in, and she'll express her feeling on this too. But I really feel that it's a practice where you're taking your energy, your physical energy, your emotional energy, your mental energy into some sort of embodiment, physical embodiment and presence and in the present moment, and igniting something with intention. So infusing this moment with intention. And, this can be like you are going about your regular day and you just have this download or this intention that, hey, I want to magnify, money in my life, or I want to create more love or prosperity in my life. It is in that moment of awareness and consciousness where I think you begin to cross a threshold in that energy point, because you're bringing more intention into that present moment, and then you're actually implementing something in that moment to create and draw energy inside of that. So, it's an interesting thing, because I think that our thoughts run our mind and our emotions run our physical body. And when you can merge the two together, that's when you really can shift your frequency and begin to attract things or create momentum in that exact moment. So, what are your thoughts on that, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that that was a beautiful, beautiful description. I love that last point you made about this. The purpose of ritual or spell work or any kind of, one of these esoteric practices is really the distillation, right, of the mental and emotional bodies into one another, right? It's this process of, with distillation, you're passing liquids back and forth and back and forth in order to obtain this new substance, right? And a purified substance rather. And so I think that ritual work, magical work, spell work, all of these things, one of the greatest intentions of them is to blend the mental and intellectual with or I guess you could say the mental and conceptual, right, with the emotional and the physical,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that ritual is something that has unfortunately been somewhat demonized, right? Ritual work, spell work, witchcraft, right? Pagan traditions in these ways, they've been demonized so heavily, principally, unfortunately, by, I think, the Christian church in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And by
Mm-hmm.
Christian doctrine. That's no knock to the Christian religion in and of itself, mostly just the institution of the church. I just want to make that disclaimer there. Um, but I do think that, historically, ritual has played a significant role in human culture and society, right? And it was one of the ways that not only community came together, but that we could heal mentally, emotionally, physically, that we could process, really turbulent human emotions, right? Like
Yeah.
grief, like anger, rage, all of these things. And it was also a way for the human being to feel like they had more agency, right?
Yeah.
Agency in their inner experience, right? By taking control over their emotional state and regulating themselves in that way. And also feeling like they have agency in their external world, right? Being
Yeah.
able to impact their external environment in a certain way that they wanted to. And I think at the heart of ritual practice, whatever kind of brand that it comes in, is like you were talking about this prerequisite of presence and
Mm-hmm.
intention, right? And being extremely rooted in the physical practice that you're doing and imbuing this physical practice with a certain energetic intention, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in my personal opinion, anything can be ritualistic. Right? Taking a shower can be a ritual if you're bringing a certain intention to it. Eating a meal can be ritualistic if you're bringing a certain intention to it. It doesn't always have to be this long drawn out 50-step spell that you're casting, right? That
Right.
requires all of these expensive materials that you might not be able to even find in your average store, right? I think that people think that there's sometimes a barrier to access, right? To magical work or ritual work. But in reality, it really doesn't require anything more than your physical body, what is around you in your physical environment, and your intention and presence.
Yeah. I think it's so important because what you're speaking on is this performative
Mm.
aspect of that has been completely loud and overdrawn. And I really wanted to backtrack because you mentioned something about like the agency and it's the power behind ritual and why it's been villainized. And not to go super dark immediately, but I feel a lot of people can get triggered right now, especially given the state of the world with the things going on that we're seeing in the Epstein files and
Mm.
how they have used these ritualistic, satanistic things that they've been doing for harm with other people. And so that's just another layer why people would immediately think of the word ritual or this kind of thought of it as demonizing and
Right.
as harmful. And it's once we like dive into this and we kind of look at the other lens and the other side of really what it's about, yes, people can use these things for bad and for negative energy, but that's not really what it's rooted in. It goes way, way, way back to the Druids, to the paganism times, to the Egyptian times, when you're talking about with grieving and stuff like rituals with the Egyptians and how they would mummify the bodies. And it was a process of integrating that person's soul into the afterlife. And so it's so deep. There's so much to untangle with this dynamic. But just to scale it back, it can be used for good. It can be used for health, for wellness, for happiness, for joy, for dealing with depression, dealing with grief. And again, like you said, you might not even realize you're doing it. You know, like the one of the immediate things that comes to my mind is I have a ritual every morning with my dogs, and it was not really intentional, but now it is because it sets the day for me. And if I don't get this morning ritual, which is literally just a morning walk with my dogs, and then we go for a coffee ride, and they look out the window, they bark at every single dog. I let them bark as much as they want. I get to sip on my coffee. And if I don't get to start my day with that morning ritual, I kind of feel sidetracked. My
Hmm.
nervous system isn't as regulated as it is with the joy of letting these two babies just bark out the window.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. That's so cute. That's adorable. I have somewhat of a similar morning ritual, but it centers around sitting on the couch with my cat and letting her make biscuits. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think it's really important to have this conversation around the unraveling of this narrative around ritual practice and witchcraft and spell work and all of these different things as something inherently like satanic or negative, or people oftentimes will feel like there is some fear in stepping into, like, I meet with so many women who express an interest in occult studies and in working with spell work or ritual work. And they will tell me that they're somewhat fearful because they feel like they're stepping into kind of a forbidden or a dangerous energy when they
Mm-hmm.
try to implement some of these practices or lean into some of this wisdom and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we've done such a disservice to women and to society at large by creating such a narrative of fear around these things, because really at the heart of what they're meant to be is that they're meant to be empowering, right? And unfortunately, I think that especially here in the Western world, in the US, right, and a predominantly, again, sorry to say it, but Christian society,
Yeah.
um, we learn about ritual in terms of, like, I feel like growing up, our early education, they talk about like ritual sacrifice a lot. And like we always hear about ritual in this way where it paints it as kind of this like um, bloody and gory and kind of horrific experience, when in reality, much of it is meant to be quite beautiful, quite purifying, and a source of not only spiritual connection, but also human connection as well. Many rituals are practiced amongst community,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but just kind of
Yeah.
driving home that fact that, like,
Yeah.
if you have felt called to working with spell work, starting to learn about a magical practice or craft, working with rituals and curating and creating your own, first of all, like Makayla said, know that you are already doing it. You just don't necessarily realize that you're doing it. And also, there's nothing to be afraid of, right? You're not dancing with the devil.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting when you're bringing up the whole Christian church, for instance, and they're doing a ritual in church every Sunday. And
Hmm.
what's interesting is there's two parts here. You're doing a ritual when you go up and I apologize if I'm offending anybody who's actually really educated on this, but I have been to church a few times, and you go up and you drink the blood of Christ and the bread of Christ, which is like a little cracker and whatever. So they give you. And it's the conduit is the priest. And if you go back into the history of rituals, all these communities would have, shamans. These shamans that would lead these ritualistic techniques or, these events, whatever, to bring people together. And it's not that I disagree, but the modern day or the modern approach that I have now is that you can be the shaman. You can be the bridge between your physical world and these other dimensions. And you don't need a priest to, be that conduit for you. And you don't need a shaman necessarily to be that conduit for you. Maybe somebody has more knowledge about these things, but it doesn't take away the fact that everyone is equal in their power when it comes to implementing this. And so it's the same thing with these girls like on Etsy. Again, no offense to them. I'm loving that they're hustling and making their money. But, For me, I would rather have my clients just be educated on this so they can go home, which I know you're going to talk about, Sarah, about your own personal rituals, but like go home and do it themselves and have way more of an effect on their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a great jumping off point to talk about like how important it is to um inherent in the practice and craft of magic, spell work, ritual work is like this element of personal touch. And it always makes me think of like, I know that this episode is not intended to be focused primarily on astrology, but it's like I can't help but
Yeah.
just perceive
I know.
everything through this framework. And it always makes me think of the third ninth house axis, right? And so for those of you who are unfamiliar, the third and ninth house axis, it's oftentimes referred to as the axis of learning and education, but in a lot of ways, it is also the axis of um, basically like convening with the divine, right? And it's very all of the cadent houses, right? The third, the sixth, the ninth, and the 12th are very much rooted in many ways around ritualistic practice, right? Whether that takes the form of a religious ritual or a pagan ritual, what have you, there is this element of ritual practice in them. And I find that particularly like this third ninth house axis, right? The ninth house is known oftentimes as the house of religion, higher education, teaching, right? Guides, gurus. And I think what's interesting is this idea that, like, you know, we oftentimes think of, at least in a modern context, because of the way that we've moved away from the original meaning of a priest or a shaman or a guru, right? We kind of view these people as, an access point to something that the lay person cannot access themselves.
Yep.
You have to go to the priest, you have to go to the rabbi or what have you in order to convene with the divine. When in reality, historically, priests, rabbis, magi, sages, right? These people, perceived themselves as guides. That's
Yeah.
all they were.
Yeah.
They were leading the horse to water in order for the horse to drink itself, right? And so it was never about them being the only access point. It was about them showing you the path for you to walk yourself, right? And I think that that's where the opposite house, the third house, comes in because a lot of people, I think, they overemphasize the third house's connection with connect with communication and with media and with siblings and all of these kind of superficial definitions,
Sure.
when in reality, the third house is very much the house of rhythms, right?
Mm.
That's why the moon, the planet that is, or, the planet astrologically that is about cycles and seasons and rhythm, she sets the kind of drum beat to
Yeah.
the cosmos, right?
Yep.
Um, she has her joy in the third house because the third house is this place where we step into rhythmic living, where we start to embody the kinds of wisdom and information that we've been guided to in the ninth house, right? The illumination moment, the aha moment happens in the ninth house, right? Typically by somebody introducing you to these new realms of information or practice, what have you. But then you must embody it, right? In the third
Right.
house, you have to incorporate it into your everyday living and ritualize it in that way. So I do find that when it comes to ritual practice, people who have a lot of third house placements, if you have them yourself, you might
Mm.
already know this, you might be a very ritualistic person. I find
Mm.
that third house people, oftentimes they always have like a little ritual right before they leave the house, before they give a speech or something of that nature. But ultimately, it is about that embodiment of knowledge through, walking the talk and through creating, by behaving intentionally in your everyday life.
Yeah, yeah. And it does take a certain level of awareness, which can be built if somebody feels like they don't have that, or if somebody doesn't feel like they're at like a high level of consciousness. It's like that's something that can be built like a muscle. I think it can just be practiced, and the more your eyes are open, the more knowledge and perception, which is like another third house thing I like to think about, is like your perception of your reality, of everybody around you. How are you thinking? How is that being processed through the left side of your logical side of your brain? Because that's intuitively feeding things into the right side. And
Hmm.
I love that you brought up rhythm. In human design, there's a channel called the 515, and everyone has all these 64 gates in their human design, which I'm going off on a little tangent. I won't get too deep into human design because it's probably the first time I think I've brought it up in this podcast. But there's a gate called the 515. Some people have this gate activated, some people don't. It's okay. Because if you don't have it activated, you will meet other people that will activate that channel for you. But essentially, what this gate teaches you is that you need to trust in the own timing of your own life, right? And so some people, they might always be late, but for them, they're right on time. But for somebody else, they're like, hey, you're not on time. And it depends what type of consciousness you're living in, and it depends what like you're paying like attention to. But essentially, if you're honoring your own rhythm, then you're honoring this own ritualistic tendency of your body of putting you in the right place at the right time to meet the right people. And so it just brings it back to this awareness, because it's interesting when you link it to the human design side, which is connecting the body. Some people, because they're honoring themselves in this way, they are the ones that, missed the train, and the train got in that bad accident. They're the ones that didn't catch that flight that morning at 9/11, right? This stuff puts you in the right place with the flu at the right time. So I think ritual just becomes so much bigger in this essence when you're just starting to honor your natural rhythms and be more present and aware with what is energy, what is universe putting you into right now in this time and place, right? We bring it back down to like the seasons and the changes of the seasons. Some people are wired, I would say, given on your birth chart, for instance, your astrology chart, are wired to be more magnetic in the spring, where other people, that's like their season to downtime. Like that's their
Oh, yeah.
downtime season, right? Like if you're born in the fall, then the springtime, like if you're a Libra or a Scorpio, that might be your time because you're having your solar return, and then the sun starts to get energy again in your chart. Whereas the springtime, when the sun is the furthest away from your sun sign, you might be tired as hell, but you've got all these other people who are like, it's spring, it's time to go, right? And so it's really dependent on your own personal journey. And why I just want to double down on like the harbor that you've been talking about is just be your own guru, essentially. Be your own leader, be your own guru, find your own rhythm, and get curious about where that's going to lead you to, because it's going to lead you to the right things.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so beautiful. And it makes me think of like, for example, when you were talking about this idea of like be your own guru and, listening to that intuitive knowing that guides you in cycles and rhythms, and like getting back to this idea of the best ritual or spell work happening with a personal touch.
Mm.
Like your body will tell you
Mm-hmm.
what needs to happen. Do you know what I mean? Like just a personal example of this is like, I want to say maybe sometime last year, I just randomly started doing this like physical practice where I felt like I needed to move like energy up and out of me. And so I started like randomly just doing these kinds of hand movements and like spiraling energy up and like blowing it away. And that might look fucking psychotic to somebody who's just observing me. But when I tell you that, like, when I do this practice, I get full body chills.
Yep.
I feel the energy moving up and out, and I feel like I have had this extreme release, right? And I use it anytime I'm feeling anxious, disembodied, ungrounded, right?
Yeah.
Especially for my people out there who have Pisces placements, we absorb other people's energy so much. I'm a natal Pisces Mercury. I need to get other people's energy up and out of me.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it just randomly, it was like a random download one day, right? It
Yeah.
makes no sense. The moon oftentimes doesn't make sense, right? The moon as kind of this like principle of ritual practice. It's
Mm.
funny, whenever I teach on the moon, people always kind of walk away from that class and they're like, huh, like really interesting, but also a little confusing. Like she's very mysterious in that way. You never like fully understand where she came from or what she means, right? The moon ultimately will only ever see half of her fully illuminated, right? There will always be this part where it's like we don't really know where she came from,
Yeah.
and yet we can feel the impact, right, of these practices that just come through as an intuitive download. So if you randomly, get this intuitive download one day that like I don't know, you need to eat mac and cheese on Tuesdays in order to attract wealth, do it. You know what I mean?
All the tourists right now are cheering on.
I know.
Like, they're like, "Oh, I just fell in love with her."
Yeah, is my Taurus Venus exposing itself right
Yes. It's interesting though. Like I guess we can dive maybe a little into our own personal ritual
now? Yeah,
techniques or
yeah.
whatever, because I feel like the first time I ever stumbled upon it myself was the beginning of my esoteric journey, very beginning of my astrology journey, and I was also struggling with a relationship with alcohol at the time, and it
Mm.
was really impacting my relationship that I was in. So after like a very bad night, I decided the next day that I was going to quit drinking and just like stop suddenly. And I cleaned my floor that day. And I look back at it when I like read my journal and I'm like, oh my God, this is an unintentional ritual that I did and it worked because I basically like cleaned my floor and mopped my floor and swept my floor for like an hour and a half, like tidying up the house, making it super clean while I was just cutting away my relationship to alcohol, which was even a deeper thing because it was related to the upbringing with my mother. And I didn't touch it for like a year and a half after doing that. And it was so automatic and it was so like in tune with how I was feeling in that moment. And then it was like a year and a half later, I was in my favorite metaphysical shop, highly, heavily into altars and ritual at that point. Every new moon, every full moon, I was just like all the time. And I found this beautiful handmade broom that I had hanging in my window for like the longest time. And it was engraved in it. And I was very drawn to the broom. And I just didn't understand why, because I wasn't going to like fly on it. I wasn't going to use it for, it wasn't a broom to like sweep my floor. But then it hit me that I had this special relationship with the symbol essentially of the broom itself, right? And so it kind of leads into like the tools and stuff, right? And you mentioned earlier you don't need anything fancy. If it just feels symbolic to you, that's like enough. That's all that matters, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, like ritual is, I think, meant to be something, it functions best as something symbolic, right?
Yeah.
Because symbology, it's like this is where, for example, like astrology, it's a symbolic language, right? In that way, it's very right-brained. It's accessing like a part of your brain that requires that you suspend logic in certain ways and just tap into sensation and feeling and like intuitive knowing on things as far as like correspondence is concerned.
Yeah.
And so ritual is also meant to be very symbolic, right? Like, for example,
Yeah.
um, you know, you want a love spell. Well, you take a rose, right? A symbol of love, right? And you pour it with honey, a symbol of fertility and sweetness, right? Like so on and so forth. Everything is meant to be symbolic, right? So I think you're absolutely right. And also, I think that the thing that you were talking to me or talking about reminded me of how historically and still, even in a modern context, ritual practice, spell work, right? All of these things are meant to be highly cleansing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because think about, like, for example, I love to talk about this one decan of the zodiac in particular to talk about like alchemical and ritualistic and occult practices, magic, right? The second decan of Scorpio is a highly, highly occult decan. And one of the things that we find with people who have placements in this second decan of Scorpio, so if you have placements anywhere from 10 to 19 degrees of Scorpio, this is you, is this experience of like feeling like you are inherently lacking in something. And so therefore you oftentimes turn to occult, alchemical, ritualistic, esoteric practices, whether that's witchcraft or otherwise, right? In order to obtain that which you feel like you lack. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel like you have all the love in the world, you're probably not going to go do a love spell or a ritual for more love. If you feel like you have all the money in the world, you're probably not going to be making a money bowl. It's not going to be on your mind. So
Right.
inherent in ritual practice and in spell work and magical practice is this sense of like, I am lacking in something that I want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to use these tools at my disposal to obtain that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But really, what you're doing is not necessarily like actually obtaining that thing. It's like you're clearing away the energy that's blocking you from having that thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And so I think that historically, like many rituals have had this undertone, and like ritual practice, magical practice has had this undertone of cleansing and purification. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, not to get too far off the beaten path, but like it also makes me think about how these cadent houses, right?
Mm.
Third, sixth, ninth, 12th, that are associated with ritual practice, right? Religious practice, spiritual practice. Um, Again, houses are not synonymous with signs. However, there
Mm.
is some sympathy there, right?
Yeah.
And so the mutable signs, these signs that usher in change and cleansing, oftentimes through destruction, right? Destruction to bring in change. They have this cleansing nature to them. And the last decan of all of the mutable signs, right? In one way, shape, or form, are associated with the cleansing or purification or sacrifice of something. We're doing away with something.
Yeah.
So I think that, I guess to just bring it all home is that when you're working with spell work, when you're working with ritual magic or ritual practice, coming at it from the angle of like, what is it that I need to clear away? Right? Like all of these decans, the final decans of the mutable signs, they're associated with the 10 of each suit, right? So there's a closing of a chapter,
Yeah.
an ending of something. We have to do away with a former version of ourselves, with a former way that we're relating to something, whether it's money, a partner, whatever,
Yeah.
right? In order to usher in something new. And so, like you say, just intuitively, like cleaning the floor as like
Yeah.
a way to do away with this, bad habit. Yeah, that's why, like, for example, just daily practices of like making your shower or your bath a very ritual experience, doing the dishes, cleaning your floors, right? Like all of these things that center around cleaning and purification are great avenues.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of my favorite things about the ending and the beginning cycle too is like people can make that the celebration. And the immediate thing that was coming to my mind when you were talking about this was this massive celebration that happens in Thailand every year in April called Songkran. And it is actually the beginning of the year for the Thai people because they celebrate it based on the natural cycles. So they celebrate it when the sun is moving into Aries, which it should be. But so yeah, so Songkran is like a 3-4 day celebration in Thailand. They do it over 13 different provinces. And they use water as purification, where essentially they are cleansing everybody through, the last year that just went by. They're celebrating the new year. There's a heavy focus on ancestors and honoring the ancestors and honoring the temples. But the major tourist attraction for Songkran is the fact that everyone just congregates in the streets for 3 days and pours water on each other and just hits you. They walk around with water guns, buckets of water, water balloons, and they just soak everybody, making this a massive community inspired ritual of cleansing, celebration, and renewal. So it's just super interesting to see how even I've seen like floods of people just congregate there. I don't even know if they actually know what they're participating in, and maybe just go for the fact that it's fun and it's like a big party, but there's a massive amount of energy behind it. And in that energy, I mean, the energy is happiness, it's joy. And I couldn't think of like a more powerful place of gratitude, happiness, joy, excitement to build momentum off of, like when you're also doing ritual. So, yeah, it's like grieving, processing, all that, but then also celebration can come into the dynamic as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think of like how, for example, when the sun is passing through the final decan of each of these mutable signs, right? It's right before the solstices and the equinoxes, right? So it's like there's this cleansing, there's this purification, there's this sacrifice in order to usher in a celebration of something new. And so, like ritual practice, magical practice, so much of it is about that cleansing and clearing of these emotional, psychological, spiritual blocks in order to celebrate, right, and embody something new. And like one of the things that you brought up earlier that I loved is about how magical practice, ritual practice, how you conceptualize it as like these threshold moments where it's an
Mm-hmm.
initiation of sorts, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to think about this interplay of essentially like again, all ritual, all spell work, it's meant to be symbolic. We're meant to incorporate the five senses sight, touch, taste, sound, smell, plus our spoken word in
Yeah.
order to kind of symbolically create this like sacrifice or cleansing of the former, and then also symbolically create and celebrate this arrival or this rebirth into the new thing that we're trying to manifest or that we're trying to embody. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I love that you brought in the senses there. It's
Mm-hmm.
super important. Yeah, because we see these tools being used, like people, I guess we could move into maybe techniques for the elements or something as like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
movement forward, because there are different things you can use to ignite the senses. Like, is it a candle? Is it food? Is it music? For me, for instance, my Cancer moon, I began rituals with baking. And so I got really kitchen magic-y. And and my ex would like, he'd go off on these long flights and these long trips, and I would bake him like protection lemon loaves, right? And I'd be like, you have to eat the whole thing, you know? But I was
I
so
love
much
you.
love and passion put into this with the herbs and, the medicine of the food. And I would light a little colored candle, like a black candle for protection or a white one while I was baking. And I have pictures of it listening to Rick Levine.
I
This was
love
like
that.
in the shout out Rick. Like, the very
So on
beginning.
brand.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, what are your thoughts here with like the different elements being incorporated, or, the elements and the signs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, again, first and foremost, it's like this, it's necessary to incorporate both a recognition of the fact that there are some kind of universal pillars of correspondence, right?
Yeah.
Like this is what we're studying in astrology, what we're studying in human design, right? When we study the universal laws. And also, it's meant to be a personalized practice, right? So I think that if you're getting into ritual work, into spell crafting, it's important to first understand like what are these universal pillars of correspondence,
Yeah.
right? I think a great jumping off point for that is studying astrology and studying the planets, right? Learning the planetary archetypes and then learning how all of these kind of base, archetypal patterns, right? Or imprints have plant correspondences, color correspondences, sound correspondences. There's all of these sensual correspondences that resonate and at the same frequency
Yeah.
of these planetary energies, right? So that's a great jumping off point to know that, like, for example, the color green is probably not going to be the most effective color to use in a symbolic practice for power, right? Or
Mm.
for, forcefulness, right? Or something like Martian in that nature. You would probably want to use the color red.
Yeah.
But also, if you have like a personal experience, let's say like take for a love spell or a love ritual, the universal symbol is typically a rose, right?
Yeah.
But let's say that, your, the love of your life always gifted you, I don't know, like hydrangeas. And so for you, hydrangeas are personally a symbol of love, right?
Yeah.
Then maybe you want to use hydrangeas, right? And so to incorporate both the rules and regulations of the cosmos in some ways, but also incorporate your personal touch. When it comes to personal touch,
Mm-hmm.
write your own spells,
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
I know it can be really tempting to just buy a spell book, right? To buy somebody else's why is the word escaping me? The word for somebody, grimoire, right?
Grimoire. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
I think it can be really tempting to do that. It's a great jumping off point. Write your own spells. I don't know about you, Makayla, but in my personal experience, the spells that I have copy and pasted from somebody else's work have never been as effective as when I have written my own,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think write your own spells, come up with your own correspondences based off of how you emotionally resonate with certain things.
Yeah.
Understand the tradition, understand these kind of universal patterns and archetypes. And then whenever you're coming to create a ritual or a spell and find that moment of connection with the divine, right? And intention setting, I think first and foremost, super important to make sure that you are in a state of energetic and emotional balance. However, you get into that, right? We were talking about this earlier, how, like, for Makayla and I, it's very physical, which
Yeah.
makes sense. We're very Aries dominant women. I like to dance beforehand. She likes to work out. For other people, it might be playing music or singing or, quite literally sitting in silence. But make sure you're in this grounded, energetic state and then find a way to incorporate all of the five senses:
Yeah.
sight, touch, taste, or sound, smell,
Yeah.
right? And on top of that, imbue the power of your own word. So I don't know if that answers your
Yeah.
question, but
Absolutely. I align with all of those things, and it can be very simple, like humans. Like, just think about it. If you're trying to bring in love, you're not going to do a cord cutting, because think about it, it's severing, right? So it just becomes very literal, very, it's not, I don't want to say logical either because it's an intuitive thing. Like, you need to be intuitive about it, but just what does that practice, what does that actual thing you're doing, what does that symbolize for you? And I really don't think I need to add much to that because you just nailed it perfectly. And it's easy to think, to feel. Feel is a massive a part, I think, of ritual. Just feel into the sense, right? If this is something that requires, a lot of emotional connection, then you might want water, right? Water is fluid. If you need something that needs your energy and igniting some spark, maybe you need to sweat, you need to move your body, you need to get that moving, or you need to get some fire going on in there, right? If you want actual moolah, you need, maybe I love to use real money in my money rituals, love to tie, I think I've talked about this in another episode. I tie my $100 bills to this statue of Mercury, Hermes, that I have. But also, I love that I go to the nail salon, my ladies who are absolutely crushing it, and they go on Amazon and they buy these stacks of like fake $100 bills, but they light an incense with it every morning. And they leave fruit, candy, apples, whatever it is, on top of their stacks of money. And I mean, those ladies are always booked up. And then air, a wind chime, music, a feather, anything that can correlate to these elements, and you can do all of them. You can use all of them at once too. But I think that's all I have to add for that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, you make an important point, like giving that illustration of the women at your nail salon about how, you know, in one way, shape, or form, ritual work, spell work, it should incorporate somewhat of a sacrifice, right? Like, we think about sacrifice in terms of like human sacrifice or animal sacrifice, but that's an extreme manifestation of that,
Yeah,
right?
please
Like,
don't.
yeah, like,
Please don't.
okay, yeah, like that's an extreme manifestation of that played a role in, more ancient civilizations and continues to play a role in tribal civilizations to this day, right? But I think that, for example, uh, you know, you sacrificing, going out and buying like a $20 bouquet of roses, that's a $20 sacrifice, right?
Yep.
If you're going to use those for a ritual, right? If you do the whole baking to the gods thing or baking for a specific, intention or manifestation, you're not going to eat that, right? Probably you're going to like sacrifice a piece of it to the deity or to the god that you're trying to invoke, right? There's like a sacrificial quality to it because it's a give and a take, right? If you're trying to receive from the universe, you have to give something, right? So these women at your nail salon sacrificing fruit,
Yep.
right, in front of this essentially altar, right, as an example of that. So that's one thing I wanted to drive home. And then another component is like something that I was thinking about as you were talking when it comes to elemental magic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is that I think another jumping off point that's really important for people to learn and study is like, what do the elements represent, right? So, like, for example, like you were mentioning, water is always going to be about healing, right? And cleansing. So, if you're doing a healing or cleansing ritual, water is a great tool to use. If you're trying to find inspiration, passion, creativity, right? Fire or even destruction, fire is a great element to use if you're trying to attract money, wealth, security, sustenance, earth. And if you're trying to attract, you know, novelty and movement
Mm-hmm.
and intellectual inspiration and social connection, air is a great element to use.
Mm-hmm.
But furthermore, even looking at your own astrological makeup, right? Because this is your own magical imprint from the cosmos. And so tapping into your own astrological makeup as far as like what tools might be most effective for you, I think can be really fascinating to work with. Like, for example,
Mm-hmm.
again, getting back to what I was talking about earlier, as the moon as somewhat of this representation. I mean, to me, she is the planet of magic, witchcraft, and ritual, right? So, looking at what element your moon is in, also the third house being this house of ritual and oftentimes magical practice, right? Looking at what element your third house is in. For me, I have an air moon. I'm a Libra moon. My third house is in Aquarius. I find that using my breath, like any spells that I've created that use my breath, have been very effective. Like, for
Mm-hmm.
example, I was talking about earlier that practice of like whistling the energy out of me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or one of the money spells that I do that has been extremely effective is I recite a spell that I wrote myself and I blow cinnamon into all entrances of my home,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So if you're a fire moon, fire magic might be really effective for you. A water moon, water, moon, earth, so on and so forth.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. Even it comes down to the modalities. Like I have no mutability in my chart.
Mm,
So when I have to do a spell magic, it has to be one and done, and that's it. I have to
okay.
leave it until I'm ready for the next one, right? It's like
Yep.
because some people like this ongoing thing. Um, like day one, I'll do this, day two, or like knot tying. Like some people will do knot tying on a string, for instance, and they'll like do it for like the whole entire week. So it's like there's no right or wrong, right? It's just you have to find what works for you. For me, no mutable chart, mutable energy in my chart. So I just have to like do it, cleanse my hands, on to the next thing when I'm
On
ready.
to the next.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So maybe this would be a good point to talk about this again, getting back to what you were talking about earlier, where magic and spell work and ritual work is meant to be this kind of synergy between the mental and the emotional, right? The conceptual and the physical. I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of using the energetic tools at our disposal in order to imbue something physical with that energy. And maybe this would be a good time to bring up the magician card in the tarot and talk a little bit about this principle of like as above, so below, and tapping into astrological magic. Do we want to do that?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the image of this card for those of you who are watching the video online. So here we go. Okay. So this is the original image of the Rider-Waite version of the Magician card in the tarot. And one of the things that I really wanted to highlight about this card are some of the symbols that we see, right? First of all, we see that there is this working table, right? This kind of workshop table in front of this magician, and it has a cup, a pentacle, a sword, and a wand on it, a representation of all four elements. And so when I think about ritual practice, magical workings, right, this magician card, it's highlighting the importance of, again, what we were just talking about, the inclusion of all four elements, right? And how it's meant to be this very sensory experience, right? So incorporating sound, touch, taste, smell, right? All of your five senses plus the four elements. But more importantly, I wanted to talk about what this figure is doing, right? One of the most important things that we see in this card is that he's holding a hand up to the sky and one hand down to earth, right? And for me, it's a representation of this principle, the Hermetic principle, as above, so below,
Yeah.
right? And that it's important whenever we're working with ritual or with magical practices, spell working, to take into consideration the fact that as above, so below, right? In order to manifest something here in the physical plane, you have to align your mental body, right? Your mental body with that which you are trying to physically make manifest. And also, it's really, really helpful to align your physical practices with the astrological or cosmological energy of the time, right? So I think that one of the things that I want to highlight to people is if you're interested in starting your work with ritual practice, with magic in particular, spell crafting, starting to learn about things like planetary hours,
Hmm.
right? Things like planetary days, looking at transits, looking at the position of the moon, right? Aligning some of your workings, especially with the decanic system, can be extremely, extremely powerful. Right. And if you want a good resource for starting to look into this, I would say looking into anything by the astrologer Austin Coppock, who
Mm.
specializes in a lot of ways in astrological magic. Also, looking into resources like more ancient texts, like the Picatrix, for example, can be really helpful
Yeah.
because I think at the heart of what ritual or magical practice is about is, again, taking the kind of energetic pattern, right, and imbuing it into something physical, right?
Yeah.
Whether that is a spell, whether that is a talisman, whether that is a candle, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
right? A
Yeah.
loaf of lemon bread, right? A lemon loaf. And so learning how to
Yeah.
co-create, right, alongside the cosmos, I think is a really important step in kind of, I guess you could say, bolstering any of these ritual or magical practices that you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. There is an app, I think it's called Planetary Hours. And if I'm wrong, I'll just drop it in the show notes and make sure it's the correct app I'm talking about. But there's literally an app that will tell you the planetary day and it will give you a little description, especially if you're new to astrology. And it will tell you the hour and what that hour is good for as well. So even if you're just getting into it and practicing, you can gain consciousness and awareness of how the energy is working around you, because a part of ritual is understanding that we can't control life, we just have to go with the rhythm of life, essentially, right? And so you're just like learning to move and flow with everything and kind of like metabolize everything that's going on in your life through these practices. It's a good way to cope. It's like you said, process grief or anything else. It's actually a really great way to cope too. But yeah, there's certain apps that I know that you can have on your phone, literally, because we live in our phone worlds now, to help you connect to these rhythms. And understand, okay, Sunday, it's the sun's day. This is a great time for myself to tap into my own creative pursuits, my creative energy. Wednesday is the day of Mercury. This is a great time if you're working on a book to harbor down on that, or a content making day, or create deals or businesses and so forth. Of course, you want to know, like Sarah had mentioned, like what's going on in the astrology transits as well, because Mercury might be retrograde, for instance, right? So it is deep. It is deep, but it does come down to trusting your own rhythm, your own timing, and your own intuition at the very end. And experimentation, I think, is a part of this process.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of this like conversation in the realm of the occult and the esoteric of like fate versus free will, right? Not
Mm.
that we're going to be able to like
Next episode.
expand. Yeah, like
Yeah.
this requires like an entire episode in and of itself. But when people talk to me about it, I always mention the fact that like pre-human beings, right? Pre-human consciousness, the sun and the planets and the earth, right, were set in motion in the way that they were going to be set in motion,
Yep.
right? And so, in that way, if they are kind of a metronome for our experiences here on earth, right, internally and externally, that is the kind of predetermined fate oriented fatalistic kind of aspect of astrology, right? But where your free will comes in, and this is why the magician card is so interesting, because when the magician card comes up in a reading, it's about like basically being a very resourceful, stepping into your resourcefulness, stepping into your ability to co-create and use your free will, right? By drawing on your resources, by aligning your energy effectively. Um, and it's this idea of like certain energetic patterns since the dawn of time were already going to be playing out and cycling through, but that you have an opportunity to align with those frequencies in the way that you choose, right?
Yeah.
And this is why I think that for anybody interested in deepening their practice of spell work, ritual, magic, astrology, in a lot of ways, I think is a prerequisite. Like
Yeah.
maybe that's like a controversial thing to say, but I think that everybody should have an awareness of it. Because let's say you're trying to do a cord cutting ritual, right? You want to get rid of that toxic ex who just won't leave you alone, right? The intuitive side of it is like maybe you intuitively feel that you should grab a black string, right? And tie the knot and then symbolically cut the knot, right? However, it's important to know that, like, for example, severance is a keyword of Mars. So,
Mm.
waiting until a time astrologically when Mars is quite strong, right, by selecting a day where Mars is potentially in his home sign or in a sign, or excuse me, or in a decan where he finds his home or rulership, right? Waiting until Mars is on the ascendant or culminating overhead and then performing the ritual is like you again tapping into that energy frequency and synergizing this principle of as above, so below.
Yeah. I Beautifully said. One thing I want to add to that as you were talking is I think it's important for people to know is that you don't have control off somebody else when you're doing
Mm,
ritual, by the way. You're taking control over your own energy field. And I definitely want to double down on this because I had a conversation with a friend a few weeks ago, and she felt like her ex had this spell casted and this control over her. And a lot of people refer to it as like the evil eye, for instance.
mm-hmm.
If you are protecting your own energy, somebody else can't penetrate into that. And that's why these things I think are so important. Consciousness, awareness of your own frequency, or you, if you try to impact somebody else or manipulate somebody else to fall in love with you, you don't have really that effect over them. And if they are operating unconsciously or unaware, you might have what we would call cast a spell over them. But because it's created in like this, I would say, negative intention, manipulative intention, it often does not unravel as you think it would, right? It unravels in a very manipulative, dark essence, dark way. And I think the same thing can go for other people, right? Some people can say, I was so in love with this person, I had a spell casted over me. And it's because you didn't have the awareness of what that cast was put over you. So, ritual and magic, this type of work, I feel, is this making sense, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like it's a way to reclaim your own empowerment and also protect your own energy field, but it's not like somebody can access you in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not to like get too symbolic again, but even just referring back to the card of the magician card is associated with the number one,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so one is the principle of I, me, myself, and I, individuality, independence, right? And so there's this idea that like magical practice, ritual practice, spell work, it's meant to be a personal practice that is focused on how it has an impact personally on you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and maybe we can just kind of close off on talking about like some of maybe our personal rituals or giving people some like ideas and kind of jumping off points as far as like daily, weekly, monthly kinds of things that we do.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Cool. All
You
right.
want to go first?
Sure, sure, sure. So I guess one thing that I wanted to mention is that, like, when you're first getting into this, keep it easy, right? Keep it easy and wait for you to have like an actual embodied experiencing of how these practices are impacting you, right? So, for example, one of my daily rituals and habits is I wake up every single morning and I light a candle. These are candles that I create once a week and I carve all of the planetary symbols into them. And I recite the invocation of each of the planets on the day of that planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are these beautiful invocations that were recorded again in this Working the Picatrix, right? And I recite, for example, on Friday. Friday is a Venus day, right? So I recite the invocation of Venus and basically invoke her into my space and into my day. And I do this in kind of, again, a ritualistic and, a ritualistic way to honor, right, these energies that I'm working with every day. Personally, I think this is important as an astrologer, right?
Yeah.
This is what my life is dedicated to.
Yep.
Um, but also, pulling a tarot card and then sitting and meditating on it, right? Coffee making is a ritual for me every morning. Every single morning, I incorporate a little bit of salt and a little bit of cinnamon into my coffee
Yep.
for energy, abundance, and protection,
Yep.
right? And I say a little spell once a month on the first Thursday of every month because it's a Jupiter day, Jupiter being the planet of abundance and wealth. I do that spell that I was talking about earlier, where I blow cinnamon into every entrance of my home and recite that incantation. On new moons and full moons, I definitely do my own kinds of meditative rituals and practices that really center around with the new moon intention setting,
Mm-hmm.
right? And especially on the first new moon of every year, something that I do is I plant a seed and I grow a plant from the start, right? From seed into full being and full expression. And I basically speak an intention for that lunar year into the seed, right?
That's
And
so
plant it and
Venus and
grow it.
Taurus. I
Yeah, I
love
know.
that. So
Like,
funny.
again, it's like these are things that I've just kind of like intuitively come up with. But,
Yeah.
like, for example,
Yeah.
one year, I had an intention of attracting in more love into my life. This was actually the year that I met my current partner, who I've been with for almost 4 years now. And I grew a rose bush from seed into full fruition,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
um, it's things like that you can just kind of play around with and incorporate. I don't know about you, Makayla, but do you have any that you think of?
Yeah, you do. You put so much love into growing things, and I love that. It's so much. I'm like listening to you. I'm like, I know her chart. I'm huge with a few things. Like fire is definitely one of them. I've always done like the carving into candle magic. I'm huge into the colors of the candles as well. And I will always use that under my new and full moons, no matter what sign it's going through, just because I feel like I'm activating my Aries in my chart. And I love candles. Like I will do a seance. I will light tea lights and have an intention with every little tea light. And then I've got 50 tea lights all over the place, right? Another thing I love to do, which is a more of a daily thing, is my shower ritual. So it's because it's so cleansing for me. I have eucalyptus hanging in my shower. And I love essential oils or those little steamers that you can put in. I will put some really high vibe music, whatever I'm kind of going towards that day. It just really depends on my own rhythm. But shower time for me is to cleanse myself, cleanse my energy. And I'm big with the ocean. So I realize not everybody is near the ocean, but I always have to live somewhere where I can drive near towards it. And when I've ever had to do something where I feel like I needed a really good fresh slate or pick me up, I will drive to the ocean and just randomly jump in the ocean. And I literally have done that in the middle of December by myself in New England. It's freezing, but it is so euphoric. I highly recommend that. And I do a lot of food stuff, like little things. I add cinnamon to my coffee every morning because I know it's like associated with protection. And it's become so just automatic. Like I'm aware that I'm doing it, but it's just so automatic within like what I'm doing. And then whenever I want to call in money, I'm big in my business right now. I'm big in manifesting wealth. I'm big in manifesting the right partnerships and connections with that. I also purposely got a tattoo for that. And then we decided to hop on our podcast like shortly after I got back from my trip. And I got this Buddhist tattoo that is all about the right partnership. It's these two golden swans. You can look it up. These two golden swans in the Buddhist thing. And yeah, and so now I have you and I have this great business mentor, right? And so you don't have to do things that permanently, but I have symbolic tattoos that are obviously a bigger ritual, right? A more impactful ritual, but that's just one way I like to do it too. I've got Mercury in Aries, so it's a little bit more aggressive, I think.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? Everyone's like, I'm not getting a tattoo, Makayla.
Well, that's a good point. Like
Yeah.
tattoo has always been historically a ritual practice. Like even to this day, like people will go to Thailand and get these traditional Thai tattoos.
Yep.
And it's like people don't realize you're sitting in like 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours of like meditation and ritual
Yeah.
and, reciting different incantations and, prayers for
Yep.
hours upon hours to get you into this kind of like transcendental hypnotic state, and then you actually do the tattoo, right?
Yeah.
It's only in a very modern context that tattooing has turned into something purely aesthetic.
You do want to be careful if somebody is thinking about that. Like I have Pluto tattooed on me, and you do, but I have Pluto, I wear Pluto in my first house. And so you want to be very mindful if you are doing a tattoo that that symbol will invoke that symbol in your life, and then it's
Mhm.
there permanently in your body. So it is super ritualistic. It's super deep, which is why I love the Thai Buddhist tattoos, because there is a sacredness and a meaning that has gone on for centuries under these symbols.
Yep, absolutely. Kind of unrelated, but something I also wanted to mention is something that I do, for example, when I am wanting to attract or invoke a certain energy into my life, is making donations
Oh yeah.
to organizations, right, that are associated or you could say protected by certain deities, right? So, for example, before recording, I was telling Makayla about how I have a little like travel ritual that involves me making a donation to the US Postal Service because the Postal Service is associated or protected by the god Mercury, right? The god of travel.
Hmm.
So I find that ever since I've started doing this, I've had very seamless travel in a way that I haven't had before. Like, for example, the most recent example that I can give is that a trip that I made to go visit my sister. I did this ritual before I left. Um, Both of my flights to get there got delayed, and somehow I still ended up arriving 15 to 20 minutes early both times. Right. So it's like things like that, where it's like there's that kind of like protective layer. And even if you have, for example, a certain planet in your chart that is in somewhat of a struggling condition, right? If you have
Yeah.
Mars in Cancer or you have Venus in Virgo or what have you, making a donation once a month, right, to an association or an organization or charity that is governed by that planet, right? So for Venus and Virgo, maybe you make a donation to a fund for, estheticians, right? For scholarships, right?
Yeah.
Or if you have Mars in Cancer, maybe you make I don't know, a donation to a domestic violence shelter, right?
Yeah.
Something of that nature. And it's basically like your way of, again, making a sacrifice and an offering to this energy and calling upon this energy to, as you are imprinting, right, a
Yeah.
positive kind of vibration onto this archetype, the archetype will then reflect it back onto you.
Oh, that's beautiful. I think that's a great, amazing recommendation. And if you don't believe us, just experiment. Just,
Yeah, that's the thing. You have to experiment.
yeah.
You have to experiment because it's one of those things, astrology, magic, tarot, right? All of these occult and esoteric practices, they are lunar kinds of significations for a reason, right? You have to have a very personal and embodied experience with them, but then once you do, you will never forget how they made you feel, how accurate they were, and how much validity they had for you personally,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Once you experience it, there's no going back, but you have to allow yourself to experience
Amen.
it.
Amen. Yeah.
Okay, is
Yeah.
that our episode for today?
I guess so. I think that was
Cool.
great. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
beautiful. Well, as always, thank you so much, everybody. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. You know the drill, as it helps us continue to bring these podcasts to your For You page. And thank you, Makayla, for a wonderful episode.
Thank you, Sarah. Talk to you
All
guys
right.
soon.
Okay. Bye, everybody. See you next
Bye.
week.